I want you to think about a time you tried to persuade someone to see things your way. Maybe you were negotiating a raise at work, or maybe you were just trying to convince your partner to pick a different restaurant for dinner.
Right, something completely normal.
Yeah, exactly. And you had your arguments lined up, your facts were straight, you knew you were right, but then in the heat of the moment, you pushed just a little too hard.
Oh, yeah. We have absolutely all been there.
You made it personal. And instantly, you watched the walls go up. Your flawless argument just, well, it didn't matter anymore.
Because the other person, they stopped listening to your logic and just started defending their own boundaries.
Exactly. The whole thing completely backfires. You win the argument in your head, but you totally lose the room in reality.
It is a universally frustrating human experience.
It really is. And today, we are taking that exact human experience, that specific moment of, like, strategic self-sabotage, and we are scaling it all the way up to the highest levels of state politics.
Which is going to get messy.
Oh, very messy. Welcome to the deep dive. Our mission today is to explore a truly fascinating opinion piece. It was published by an organization called the Accountability Gap.
And it's titled A 2026 Postmortem Review of the Life and Death of HB 6003 and SB 1700.
Which I know it sounds incredibly dense.
It does, but I promise you, the story underneath those bill numbers is anything but dry. I mean, it is a literal masterclass in human psychology and political strategy.
So we are looking at the failure of the Florida legislature to repeal a very specific law. This happened between January and March of 2026.
Right. It's a real-time case study in how laws actually get made. Or, well, in this case, how they die.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
But before we get into the weeds here, we need to make a really clear distinction for you, the listener.
This is crucial, yeah. The source material we are unpacking today dives headfirst into political lobbying, grassroots advocacy, and the sometimes very chaotic maneuvers of the legislative process.
Right. And to be absolutely clear, we are not here to take any political sides. We aren't endorsing the activists, the lobbyists, the lawmakers, or even the author of the piece.
No, not at all. Our job today is to impartially report on the claims and the analysis made in this text.
We are just here to unpack the author's perspective on the source material, to understand the mechanics of what they claim actually happened.
Because the mechanics themselves are just fascinating. The transition from this big picture policy debate to the specific narrative that dominated the headlines, it's a classic, emotionally satisfying story.
It was framed entirely by the public as, the righteous activist versus the corrupt corporate lobbyists.
Right.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because before we can understand the strategy, we really have to understand the stakes.
Yeah, we have to know what they were fighting over.
Exactly. The source material references the failure to repeal Florida Statute 768.21 sub 8 and the fight over, quote, malpractice caps. For someone who doesn't speak fluent legalese, what does that actually mean?
Well, it's a highly emotional issue, which explains a lot of the passion we're going to discuss. In simple terms, this specific Florida statute is a law that prevents certain family members, specifically adult children or parents, from suing for emotional pain and suffering.
Okay.
Specifically, if their adult relative dies due to medical negligence.
Wow. Okay, so if an adult parent dies because of a doctor's mistake, their grown children currently cannot sue for the emotional devastation of that loss under this specific law.
Exactly. So the grassroots activists, understandably, wanted a clean repeal of this law to allow those lawsuits to go forward.
I mean, that makes total sense. They were fighting for families who felt they had been denied justice.
Absolutely. But on the other side of the debate, the Florida Senate and the healthcare industry wanted what are called caps.
And caps are essentially a strict financial limit on how much money a jury could award in those exact cases, right?
Correct. The legislative logic there is that without caps, juries might award massive multi-million-dollar payouts.
Yeah.
And those massive payouts could bankrupt hospitals, skyrocket malpractice insurance premiums, and ultimately drive doctors right out of the state.
Wow. So you have a very intense collision here. Activists fighting for unlimited accountability for grieving families, and lawmakers trying to protect the state's healthcare economy from basically collapsing under limitless litigation.
That is the core tension, yes.
That context is so vital. It really humanizes the activist's passion. But as our source material points out, having a righteous cause does not guarantee you a winning legislative strategy.
No, it definitely doesn't.
So let's look at the 2026 legislative session, which ran from January to March. The Florida House of Representatives actually passed their version of the repeal bill that was HB 6003 by a strong margin.
They did. But the Senate companion bill, SB 1700, just completely stalled out.
Right. It never moved beyond being referred to committee.
And that stall is where the public narrative just took off. The post-mortem piece points directly to an interview given during the final week of that session.
Who was the interview with?
It was Korniyenko, the executive director of the Florida Medical Rights Association. She went on a YouTube channel hosted by Ed Salazar.
Oh, right.
And she publicly claimed that Senate leadership had quietly killed the momentum of the successful House bill because they had, sided with insurance and healthcare lobbyists.
I mean, it's a neat, tidy explanation. The House passed it, the Senate killed it, so the Senate must be in the pocket of big corporate money.
It externalizes all the blame. It makes it very simple.
But the analysis we're looking at steps in here and says, hold on, let's look at the structural reality of the government.
Right, because there's a huge piece of counter-evidence to this corrupt lobbyist theory. It's a massive structural roadblock that the activists seem to just, brush past.
And what was that?
The governor had already vetoed a clean repeal of this exact statute the previous year, on May 29, 2025.
Right. And honestly, this is where I need you to explain the mechanics.
Yeah.
Because as a layperson, I hear veto and I think, okay, the governor said no last year. But it's a new year. It's a new session.
You'd think they could just try again.
Exactly. Why does a veto from May 2025 paralyze the Senate in 2026? Can't they just vote on it again?
Mechanically, a veto doesn't just reset the board. It builds a literal brick wall across the middle of the highway.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. In Florida, overturning a governor's veto requires a 2/3 supermajority vote in both chambers.
Which is huge.
It's massive. Whipping a 2/3 vote on an incredibly contentious, highly publicized issue is nearly impossible. Furthermore, legislative sessions are short. Floor time is the single most valuable currency a lawmaker has.
Okay, so they don't want to waste time.
Exactly. Senate leadership is not going to waste days of valuable floor time debating and passing a bill that is just going to get vetoed again.
Okay, let's unpack this. If I'm a project manager and the CEO of my company just flat out rejected my big pitch on a Friday, I don't just walk into their office on Monday, submit the exact same pitch completely unchanged, and expect a different result.
No, you would get fired.
Right. I either negotiate the details they hated or I move on to a new project. So is this corruption or just practical reality?
It's practical reality. A veto doesn't resolve division, it magnifies it. And in Korniyenko's own interview, she actually drops a detail that dismantles her lobbying conspiracy theory.
Wait, really? What did she say?
She reported that Senator Clay Yarbrough admitted the bill was not going to be prioritized moving forward, specifically because of the governor's prior veto.
Wow. So the Senate really only had 3 choices here.
Yeah. Option 1, pass the exact same clean repeal and invite another guaranteed veto, wasting everyone's time. Option 2, negotiate a version of the bill that includes the safeguards and the malpractice caps the governor specifically asked for in his veto letter.
But the activists absolutely refused to do that. They fought off a caps amendment back in 2025, so they treated the debate over caps as a totally closed discussion. They figured they didn't have to compromise.
Which leaves the Senate with option 3. Decline to spend valuable committee time on a bill that has absolutely zero realistic path to becoming a law.
And they chose option 3.
They did. As the analysis points out, dropping the bill isn't a secretive, lobbyist-funded conspiracy. It is simply an admission of non-viability.
But hold on, let me push back here. Isn't that just a very convenient excuse for the Senate? Like, oh, we're just dropping this because of the veto, it's standard procedure.
I see where you're going with this.
Because to a lot of listeners, if these senators are actively taking campaign donations from the healthcare industry, and then they suddenly decide a bill regulating that industry is not viable, that doesn't look like standard procedure. That looks like a bribe disguised as procedure.
How does the author reconcile that?
Yeah, how do they?
It's a very fair question, and it's basically the fundamental tension of American politics. But the author addresses this by distinguishing between how the public views campaign finance and how the system actually operates. Yes, public records show legislators accepting lobbyist money, but it is basically axiomatic in politics that large corporations hedge their bets. They donate to leadership on both sides of the aisle because they want a seat at the table no matter who is in charge.
So the money is everywhere, regardless of the specific bill.
Right. Lobbying is a built-in legal part of the legislative process. The author argues that to prove a corrupt conspiracy, the advocates would need to show that these lobbyist interactions improperly displaced normal legislative procedures.
Oh.
Showing that lobbyists wrote amendments or talked to senators isn't a smoking gun. It just establishes that lobbying happened.
It doesn't prove that lobbying alone explains why the Senate dropped the bill.
Exactly, especially when you have a documented veto forcing their hand.
Okay, so from a purely procedural standpoint, the veto made the bill practically dead. But the source material suggests there was something much deeper and much more volatile going on here.
Oh, definitely.
The Senate didn't just passively ignore this bill. They seemed to become actively, viscerally hostile to the advocates themselves.
And this brings us to the psychological reality of politics. The analysis argues that the advocacy narrative entirely omits the single event that likely mattered most to the human beings sitting in that Senate chamber.
Here's where it gets really interesting. We have to talk about the infamous 2025 billboard campaign.
The tactical choice that changed everything.
So picture this. You are Senator Gail Harrell. You are engaged in this highly contentious, deeply emotional debate over repealing this statute, and the grassroots advocates decide to apply pressure.
Right.
But they don't just run standard issue ads on TV. They don't just organize a phone bank. They rent a billboard and they place it right at the entrance to Senator Harrell's own neighborhood.
Wow.
It features a massive image of her face, with text accusing her of supporting profits over people.
It was a deeply personal, highly visible attack, right where she lives, where her family and her neighbors see it every single day.
That is so aggressive.
It is. And the tragedy here, as the legislative transcripts show, is that Senator Harrell actually wanted to vote for the 2025 repeal bill. That was HB 6017.
Wait, really? She was an ally?
She was a potential ally. But she felt she couldn't support it without the malpractice caps to protect the healthcare system. It was a policy disagreement over the mechanism of the bill, not a fundamental opposition to the grieving families.
But the activists didn't care about that nuance. They just saw someone who wasn't giving them exactly what they wanted, so they went nuclear.
They did.
She described the billboard attack on the Senate floor as personally devastating. And this is the part of the story that just blows my mind. The advocates probably thought this was a brilliant, aggressive pressure tactic.
They probably thought it showed strength.
Right. But what actually happened was a massive 25-minute institutional defense of Senator Harrell by her colleagues right there on the Senate floor.
What's fascinating here is the concept of institutional recoil. A legislature is not just a voting machine where you put in public pressure and a policy pops out. It is a living institution with its own reflexes, its own internal loyalties, and its own thresholds of tolerance.
It's like needing a massive favor from a close-knit family, but deciding the best way to ask is by standing on their front lawn with a megaphone, insulting the matriarch.
Right.
Of course they're going to close ranks. You attack the family.
That is a perfect analogy. When an outside campaign personalizes a policy disagreement, lawmakers stop hearing the policy and start defending their boundaries. Let's look at what the other senators actually said during those 25 minutes, because it was brutal and it came from all sides.
Yeah, give me some examples.
Senator Pizzo stood up, condemned the personal attacks, and pointed out that nobody had done more for healthcare access in the state than Senator Harrell.
What?
He was so frustrated by the tactics that he actually diminished the advocates' entire argument. He called the affecting cases de minimis, meaning mathematically insignificant compared to the overall civil court volume.
Ouch. When you have lawmakers calling the very foundation of your emotional cause de minimis, you have completely lost the room.
Absolutely. And it kept going. Senator Osgood took the floor and called the attacks cowardly. Senator Boyd stated flatly that an attack on Senator Harrell was an attack on the chamber itself.
They were drawing a hard line in the sand.
They really were. And it wasn't just billboards. The escalation was physical. Senator Burton revealed on the floor that her own aide had been bullied in a Capitol elevator by one of the advocates.
Are you serious? An elevator?
Yes. It got to the point where Senator Yarborough, who, let's remember, was actually the sponsor of the repeal bill the activists wanted, stood up and called the billboard tactic sick, cowardly, and immature.
Let that sink in. The sponsor of your own bill is calling your tactics sick and immature on the public record.
Yeah.
What did the advocates expect to happen? Did they think the Senate would just cower in fear?
They expected capitulation. They expected the lawmakers to be so afraid of bad PR that they would just give in. But as the postmortem notes, once a chamber begins defending its own dignity, even sympathetic lawmakers become less willing to reward the campaign responsible for the attack.
Because you don't want to pass a bill that makes it look like you gave in to elevator bullies and neighborhood smear campaigns.
Exactly. It sets a terrible precedent for the institution.
So if you just watch the Senate spend 25 minutes publicly tearing apart your billboard campaign, the logical next step is to apologize, de-escalate, and pivot your strategy.
Right, read the room.
Did the activists do that?
Huh.
Did they realize they overplayed their hand?
Not according to the source material. And this explores the profound danger of echo chambers and ignoring institutional feedback. The analysis brings up a white paper published in November 2025 by the Accountability Gap. It was titled Soundbites versus Substance.
And it was basically a crystal ball for the 2026 session.
It really was. The white paper accurately predicted this exact outcome. It explicitly warned that public mockery, vulgarizing the disagreement, and disrespecting office holders would only alienate the exact officials whose cooperation was absolutely required to pass the reform.
It warned that when advocacy descends into spectacle, it loses its access to power.
Yes.
And yet, when you look at that YouTube interview with Lauren Korniyenko and Ed Salazar at the end of the 2026 session, there is almost zero introspection about those tactics.
Not at all.
She blames committee bottlenecks. She blames secret amendment drafting by lobbyists. She blames leadership for not wanting to override a veto. But she completely ignores the 25-minute floor rebuke.
Yeah.
She ignores the mass emails, the public shaming, the fact that a senator's aide was harassed in an elevator.
She externalizes the blame to preserve the morale of the movement. It is much easier to tell your supporters, we were cheated by corrupt forces, than to say our aggressive tactics alienated our allies.
That makes sense.
But the analysis makes a very sharp observation here. Preserving morale is not the same thing as conducting a serious postmortem. If you don't ask whether your own movement helped create the conditions for the Senate's resistance, you can never fix your strategy.
So what does this all mean? To me, it feels like this movement treated a complex, nuanced legislative battle like a viral social media campaign.
That's exactly it.
They wanted the emotional high of a moral protest. They wanted the likes, the shares, the feeling of being undeniably right. But it's the difference between trying to win an argument on the internet versus actually trying to negotiate a contract in the real world.
Right. You can't just own the person whose signature you literally need on the dotted line.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, a movement must choose its identity. Are you a moral protest meant to energize supporters, or a legislative campaign dealing with people who expect negotiation and respect?
You can pressure a legislature, certainly, but you can rarely bully it into trust.
So to distill all this down for you, the listener, the failure to repeal Florida Statute 768.21 sub 8 wasn't just a simple story of industry lobbyists killing a bill in the shadows.
No, it was much more complicated.
It was a complex mix of three things.
Rare.
First, the governor's prior veto meant the bill was mathematically dead on arrival. Second, there was an unresolved dispute over caps. And third, crucially, an advocacy campaign that completely alienated its target audience.
By turning a policy debate into a series of highly visible personal attacks.
Exactly. And that is the practical value of this deep dive for you listening right now. Whether you are advocating for a new law, pitching a project at work, or just trying to change a friend's mind, understanding the boundaries and the psychology of the person you're engaging with is just as important as the facts of your argument.
Because once the walls of self-defense go up, the listening stops.
And that leaves us with a final, provocative thought to mull over based on everything we learned from this source material.
Okay, let's hear it.
If traditional lobbying involves massive corporations hedging their bets by pouring money into both sides of the aisle,
Right.
and if aggressive public shaming campaigns just trigger politicians to close ranks and defend their institutions, what does an effective modern grassroots campaign actually look like?
How do you genuinely disrupt entrenched political reflexes without losing your seat at the negotiating table?
Exactly. It's something to think about the next time you feel the urge to pull out a megaphone.
Until next time.
Thanks for diving deep with us.